it's good to be here today, and hopefully we can take advantage of this smaller group size and have a little, you know, discussion as we go along. What I wanted to tell you about were some of the things I did on my sabbatical, which was the last academic year. For a while now, I've been studying alpine plants and climate change. Before this, before I started studying alpine plants and climate change, I studied plants in general and climate change at in various experiments. This first picture is of the Sabathia Pass snowfield at Glacier National Park. This isn't me, although I do have a red coat. This is my son, Charlie Apple, who came up there with me one time. And the first thing in alpine plant studying that I did while on sabbatical was to go to Glacier National Park and conduct a study of the effects of receding snowfields and glaciers on plants that grow along their edges. This is a famous series of 4 photographs. Geospatially referenced repeat photographs are great records, perhaps unintentional records as they started out. T.J. Heilman in 1938 probably had no idea that these were his photograph was going to be part of a famous series. But in the intervening years, other people have come along and taken pictures at the same spot, and we now have an iceberg lake where Grinnell Glacier, the terminus of Grinnell Glacier, was not all that long ago. So we've got receding glaciers and snowfields at Glacier Park. Now, my part of it, and this is a study we initiated summer 2012, but which is going to continue this coming summer, is to measure impacts to rare peripheral Arctic alpine plants at the edges of permanent snowfields, glaciers that are receding due to climate change in Glacier National Park. Quite the handle on that, but that is what the official project name is through the Park Service. This is funded through RMCESU, not a huge pile of money, but enough to get a few students on the projects, and I think I'm looking for at least one other student if you know of someone who'd like to work with me in the field this coming summer at Glacier. This is the Pygmy Poppy, and it's a rare Arctic alpine plant that grows right near Sabathia Pass snowfield. Arctic alpine plants, what is the significance there? It's a plant that grows in the Arctic, but also in the alpine or above tree line. And if you have an Arctic alpine plant, its range is mostly in the Arctic. Some of these come down into Glacier National Park. That's the southern terminus of their range. And they're fairly rare in Glacier Park. So that's why it's not just snowfield plants, it's rare Arctic alpine plants. So, if you're interested in some thoughts on where you can find rare plants and why they're concentrated, this is a really nice paper by Lesica et al. Peter Lesica is over at U of M. Rare plants are common where you find them. And we found that to be true. We found many rare plants concentrated in a small area. So what did we actually do at the snowfields? Well, we initiated a fine-scale and long-term monitoring project on snowfield plant diversity, distribution, and abundance. And we established, photographed, and geospatially referenced 50-meter transects at the toe, which is the front end, and lateral edges of snowfields at Sabathia Pass, Mckinnon Pass, Preston Park, and Mount Clements. And then we set up another transect, which is 100 meters long, from snowfield to tree line at Mount Clements. I'll show you a map of those places in a second. And each transect has 2 1-meter squared quadrats at 5-meter intervals with step point sampling at 1-meter intervals. And then from that, And from the photographs, we have data on species presence and percent cover. And then we looked for and found some, but not all, rare Arctic alpine plants at snowfields, bogs, and near lakes and springs. So not all of the rare Arctic alpine plants are right at the edges of snowfields, but they often seem to rely on meltwater from snowfields and from water from springs. So hydrology is a very important factor in where these plants live. So what did we get? Well, this is a species list that I have constructed, and it just shows, here's the Mount Clemens transected. We find Antenaria at MCT3, which means the third transect at Mount Clemens. Did we find an anemone on the Mount Clemens moraine, and so on. So it's a map of where we found these in 2012. And then we also have data that is percent cover for the different species along the transects. This one's for Sabathia Pass, transect 1, and as you can see, there aren't a whole lot of plants until you get around to 10 to 15 meters away, and then you start seeing more. And one thing to bring up is that, where is the edge of a snowfield? The answer is right there. The next day, it's right over there. They melt quickly in the late summer, so your edge on July 31st can be not your edge when you come back on August 2nd. We measured one snowfield that melted over 4 meters in 2 days, and that's after a rain on snow event, which contributes to a lot of melting of snowfields. But they are changing rapidly. Some of them melt back in the high summer anyway, but we had some rapid snow melt. Anyway, here's Glacier National Park, thanks to Google. This is Hidden Lake. Some of you may have hiked up to here. You go up to Logan Pass, and then you walk on that wonderful boardwalk and probably see some mountain goats. And as you're walking along, Mount Clemens is on your right. And this is where we had one transect. Going to the Sun Highway is here. We're going down the east side of the divide. This is Sabathia Bend. To the other 3 sites we hiked in on the Sabathia Pass Trail. Mckinnon Pass right here. The divide is up here. And then if you kept going on a trail, you'd come out at Many Glacier. Preston Park right here. This is a high alpine park or meadow area. And then higher up on Sabathia Pass, excuse me. And this shape is actually one of our snowfields that we looked at. Continuing up to the top here, we have Sexton Glacier. We went one day and surveyed it quickly, and then we were going to come back, but weather and so on precluded our going back again. But in 2014, I would like to be able to go back to Sexton Glacier and see what's there. So here's a snowfield near Sabathia Pass. This is a toe of a snowfield, so the end. So as you can see, there's a puddle where it's melted off. You can get into these places just about any time of year through some way, shape, or form, but the trails are clear for only a short time of the year. So it was late summer. It was August by the time we got in and got our transects in, which is summer's kind of ending at lower elevations, but there it's just starting. These meltwater puddles at the ends of snowfields are pretty common, especially if you got something that's melting pretty fast on hot days. There's a lot of sun at high elevations, a lot of UV, a lot of solar energy. And this is my one student who worked with me, one of the students who worked with me. This is DJ Moritz from the math department. Some of you might know him, and there he is at the toe of Sabathia Pass snowfield wearing a wonderful orange vest, which we had to wear for the Park Service so that it signified to others that we were going off the trail for a reason. We weren't just trying to cause erosion and all that stuff. There are a lot of social trails that start up at Glacier from people just walking off, and there's a lot of soil compression and trampling and so on that happens there. So anyway, the orange vests are the insignia of science when you're at Glacier, and you get lots of pockets in those. Anyway, DJ and Alice Martin, another student, and I worked on this. And here's a picture of a plant. This is Silene acaulis, sometimes pronounced Silene, depending on, I guess, how you learned it. It's an abundant and xeromorphic, which means it thrives on dry temperatures. It's got the morphology of living in a dry climate. It's a cushion plant. And cushion plants, you may have heard of them as, oh, that's what they have up in the alpine regions. Yes, but there are many other forms. And cushion plants generally, in our travels, weren't growing right on the very edge of snowfields. There we found some different, more broader leaf plants. And then we have up here on these ridges, I just wanted to point out to you, we have Dryas octopetala, which is a member of the rose family, and Salix arctica, and these both form mats on ridges away from the snowfields. And these Dryas octopetala is very important in nitrogen fixation, and Salix arctica is a teeny tiny willow. It only gets a few inches high, but it's in the same genus as the weeping willow along rivers and so on. This is looking north from Sabathia Pass towards Canada. Okay, so this is the Preston Park snowfield, and this is a flatter snowfield. We wanted to look and see, well, what's it like at a flat snowfield? Snowfields aren't always tilted, as in these over here, and so we ran some surveys, some transects here. The snowfield generally extends out this way. You can almost see its footprint. But behind it, because it's in the lee of this little ridge, we have trees very close to the snowfield, and that's kind of unusual. A few other pictures of Preston Park, subalpine fir trees, and this is Sabathia Procumbens. It's also in the rose family. One thing I want to mention is that we were working in bear country, and I'm scared of bears, and we brought bear spray and took precautions and made lots of noise. So we got chances to sing and stuff like that while we were walking along to try and make noise just in case a bear came along. We did not see a one the whole time. I finally saw a bear up on Mount Fleecer last month. It was a black bear, and we were fine. Although black bears can be dangerous. Anyway, this is the Pygmy Pass snowfield. Excuse me, I was digressing. The Pygmy Pass snowfield up here, just straddling the Continental Divide. This one probably has the most human impact because the Continental Divide Trail runs very close to this snowfield. So what's accessible to researchers is also accessible to recreational hikers. And lest you think, oh, those mountain wildflowers, they're so glamorous, I want to study those. This is a sample of what we often found in our quadrats. Oxyria and Epilobium. Very small plants with not very flashy flowers, but they're what lives on the edges of snowfields, along with some other species. A lot of scree and rocks. This is 5 meters from the edge. But these two species can come up right away when the snow melts. And these little creatures, the marmot right here, this little individual, had a little fort right over here, and it would make these little sallies out to here and then eat Oxyria, which is also called the mountain sorrel. So plant distribution is linked to where the animals are going to be approaching the plants and dispersing seeds and eating them. The plants aren't dispersed where they are just because of what the plants do. It's also what animals do with the plants. Now, a while ago I said that snowfield plants that rare Arctic alpine plants sometimes aren't found right near snowfields. And this is an example of how they can depend on other sources of water and other locations. So this is a late July 2012 view of the Mount Clements moraine snowfields. Right behind this moraine, there's a truly vast snowfield that I'm going to explore in 2014. Anyway, a stream and a pond. The stream is sort of a spring-fed stream and also snowmelt-fed. Anyway, that's late July. August 13th, Mount Clements. A green rock right here marks the center of this, where the center of the snowfield was on 7/13. So you come 7/31, come back 2 weeks later, and the snowfield edge is around the corner of this slide. But down here is where we found Tophieldia, the false asphodel. And this is a rare Arctic alpine plant. It's a monocot of snowmelt-fed ponds, springs, streams, and bogs, and not specifically of snowfields. So it would be interesting to see what influence the snowfield itself has on the distribution of Tophieldia. Okay, so what did we find at the snowfield edges? And by edges, I mean approximately 10 meters from the edge to the actual snowfield. Rocks, scree, meltwater pools, and mud. This varies with topography. And plant species at snowfield edges generally differ from those that live away from snowfield edges. So you have this set of plants, and you can find the same associations over and over at different snowfields that live right near the snowfield edge. And these are not necessarily the rare plants. In fact, they usually weren't. Rare Arctic alpine plants can live near snowfields, but usually not at their edges. An example is Aquilegia jonesii, or the Jones columbine. And here's one living in a draba plant, which is in the mustard family. So this is the Aquilegia. It has a beautiful blue flower. This one wasn't blooming right then. Anyway, what do we find at the edges of snowfields? Well, these are some of the plants that usually were right at the edge of the snowfield. Oxyria, Sebaldia, Epilobium, and Phacelia. And they're just herbaceous perennials, and they'll emerge really quickly within days of snowmelt and grow close to the snowfields. And then xeromorphic cushion plants, such as Saline, grew away from the snowfields. And as with the marmot, snowfields are influenced by which animals are there. This mountain goat we named Sully because we were worried that we were sullying her lunch spot by being up at the snowfield. So we were kind of on a first name basis with this one goat. We tried to ignore her, but she was around. Anyway, walking along, eating plants that were under snow recently is a way of life for mountain goats. And the responses of plants to grazing are a huge part of how loss of snowfields will influence them. So it's not just hydrology. And then, take-home message from this part of the seminar is that plant communities are likely to change with receding snowfields and glaciers. And these are montane plants right here. This is from Bering Creek in Glacier. And these may be moving upslope as habitat opens up when the snowfields melt, but it depends on many factors. Okay, so next phase of this seminar is on the GLORIA project, with which I've been involved for a while. GLORIA stands for Global Observation Research Initiative in Alpine Environments. And it's a network of long-term plant and temperature monitoring sites on alpine summits with the purpose of looking at what happens to alpine plants in the context of climate change. And it started in the Austrian Alps. Pauli, Grabher, and Gottfried et al. Were the main people who started it. But there are now 116 active target regions, including one in southwest Montana that we started. Josh was involved with that. And we've resurveyed it as of summer 2013. So you resurvey them every 5 years. But look, you can see there's New Zealand, Australia, Japan, Himalayas, Greenland, Iceland, all over the place, many in South America. So, GLORIA sites consist of 4 subsummits along an altitudinal gradient where plants are surveyed at 5-year intervals and temperatures are recorded hourly. So you have an altitudinal gradient of subsummits, and then they're set up according to a protocol so that you don't get a lot of introduced variables, because you have people from all over the world with all different mountaintops setting up these sites. So you have 3 meter squared quadrats 5 meters below the summit at each of these subsummits, and you put a temperature sensor at each quadrat. These are just little hobo data loggers. A few other kinds will work too. And then you take surveys of the plants in these 4 corners. And these other corners are for moving around, so you don't trample the other plants. So you are influencing the plants by being there, because you have to stand somewhere. And I try to take as few people as possible up to the GLORIA summits with me when I go. I think the most people we've had 3 until last summer, when we had some visitors from Norway and we took a larger group. But anyway, this is what several years worth of hourly temperature data looks like from Mount Keokirk, which is in the Pioneer Mountains. The North Summit has the most snow accumulation, and you see this insulative effect of the snow right here. And then west is more windblown, and you probably don't get, inferring from this graph, you don't get the snow building up, so you've got more temperature fluctuation, less insulation. But these are pretty cold places to be Pioneer Mountain summits. If you don't know where the Pioneers are, they're right between Butte and Dillon on your right. And there's a road-like surface that you can drive in to get there, but it's pretty gnarly. It's a white knuckler, and then a hike. So, yes, for the 4 different cardinal directions. So that's the temperature. It's teeny tiny. It's minus 30 to positive 30. C, yes, C, definitely. Okay, and these are some plants from Keokirk. This is Erytricium nanum, a little plant in the Boraginaceae, very nice little flower, little cushion plant. And this is, last summer, this is the one exception when we had more people go to a GLORIA site. This is Sverre and Jarle, and they are some visitors from Norway who were here, and they are also involved with the GLORIA project and have related projects on the slope approach, which means what's going to come upslope and influence what plants will be there. And this is Kendra McQuillan, who is a journalism grad student from U of M who's studying science communication, and she came over and is making a multimedia story on the GLORIA project. So Kendra joined our group, interviewed us and everything. So one theme of plant ecological research is plant functional traits, which is essentially the study of what traits plants have and how that allows them to live where they do. Traits are just about any characteristic of a plant. You could make a list that goes on and on and on and on. And how do you choose which ones are going to be important? So hold that thought. I will get to that. But within the GLORIA group, there's a subgroup of which I'm a member, and we're thinking that functional trait research might simplify comparisons of trends across regions with different taxonomic groups. So are we looking at, say, cushion plants in Africa, Iceland, and Montana? What do they do in response to climate change? So that type of comparison could be made. And traits that are especially influenced by temperature and precipitation or other climatic variables may be valuable predictors of plant responses to climate change. So our ideas are to use plant functional traits to predict and interpret responses of plants to climate change, and then use the vast GLORIA database to record and track these traits. And one thing we've been doing starting this past year is to make in situ comparisons that will eventually and hopefully go into a predictive model. And this involves looking at plants in New Zealand, Scotland, and Montana. So you can get data on plant functional traits without having to go to all of these places. Even though it's fun to go to all these places, it's very expensive, and you have to be there right when the plants are showing those traits and so on and so forth. And also, it can be invasive to sample things in the field. So if you can get some field data, possibly pilot studies in the field, you can get a lot of information from the literature. Cornelissen et al. In 2003 published a really nice paper in Australian Journal of Botany on protocols for standardized and easy measurements. And then you can look in floras and herbaria for functional traits. And you can look in all sorts of, there's flora indicativa and all sorts of things, places you can look to see what traits these plants have. The problem with that is that you're then looking at the average. So it's good to have some ground truthing or baseline studies so you can see what traits the plants have when they're outside instead of just what's written about them. And here's a list of plant functional traits for inclusion in the GLORIA database. This is a work in progress. We don't have these traits actually in the database yet, but we're moving towards that. So just to point out a few of them: life strategy, is it a perennial, a biennial, or an annual? Does it reproduce clonally? That could be very important in alpine regions where you've got a really short growing season and the plant doesn't have to complete sexual reproduction in order to spread. You don't have to have seed germination in that case, and so on. How many growing axes are there? Edibility and responses to grazing, habitat specialization, where does it currently live, tolerance ranges, how much UV can it tolerate. Plants have a lot of mechanisms for tolerating UV, but does the plant you're considering have these mechanisms, and so on. Associations, does it grow near end fixers or in cushion plants? Yes, partially. Let me back up to this. This is where we looked in Flora Indicativa to see if we had information that would be useful that we could get without actually going to the field. So sort of a field test of this. And then this list goes on, and there's not time to go through every item on it, but leaf structure, whether you've got an evergreen, whether you've got a geophyte, which is a plant that exists in the winter with its apical meristem underground, and so on. Just some of the things. Okay, so now shifting gears again, I'll tell you a little bit about New Zealand and Scotland. I went to New Zealand and studied some of the alpine plants there and saw what some of the differences were between the plants of New Zealand and here, and there are many, many differences. Their cushion plants are much larger than ours. They have these things called vegetable sheep that are about a meter or so across, and those are cushion plants, where our silene or moss campion is one of our biggest cushion plants. But we did have some similarities. We have bunch grasses, they have tussocks. And I'll show you some of these. And then I'll take you on a little mini tour of the Milford Track and a few other places which we hiked on. So I better speak quickly because it's already 4:30 anyway, and we've got 2 countries to go. So here's New Zealand. This is at Mckinnon Pass, which is at the top of the Milford Track. Oh, it is around 4,000 or 5,000 feet. So at the pass, it comes right up out. There's a lot of relief there. It comes right up out of the ocean. So, and this is a long black. Important way of life in New Zealand is to go and get a long black, which is very nice. It's espresso with hot water poured over it, but always served very nicely in these color-coordinated porcelain cups. So just a little bit about culture. Speaking of culture, here's a group that I went on some botanical field trips with. Christian Corners right here, Alan Mark. This is Bill from Australia, Diego from Spain, Mark from South Dakota. Very nice man from South Africa who studies insects and is a painter. Anyway, this is Mount Burns, where one of the New Zealand GLORIA sites is. And this is a tussock. This is snow tussock right here. This is Selmesia right there. Dracophyllum right there. And this is a kite diagram, which is a way that you can map out height and frequency. You can map out the frequency of plants that have parts at that particular height. So this is a tussock right here, and that's another tussock, and this is a long skinny plant right here. So I have software with which to do this, and I've tried my hand at it, and it's pretty easy to work. I've gotten some kite diagrams from Mount Fleecer, a nearby mountain. Anyway, so I went around with this group for a while, about a week in all, and we went all over the place and learned about New Zealand plants, and it was a wonderful opportunity. Note this tree line in the background. Very straight tree line. This is in Fiordland National Park on New Zealand's South Island, and you can see that we've got a straight line, and that's characteristic of this national park, and it has to do with temperature. Average of approximately 5 degrees C, according to Christian Corner, the man on the left in this picture, is where you have tree line. It overrides other factors such as fog, rainfall, avalanche chutes, and so on. So very interesting. He gave a little lecture on tree line as we were walking up to tree line. It was very cool. Okay, and then another place I visited was the snow fence. This is a famous snow fence, and it's a good snowy day to be telling about it. But this was established in 1959, and the botanists from the South Island of New Zealand have been studying weather and how the plants differ on each side of the snowfield ever since. So over half a century of long study, mostly by the same person who's now in his 80s. So that's on top of a very different mountain range that's inland, and you can see it's more xeric or drier. Okay, and here's the very next day at sea level. This is out on the Otago Peninsula, and we're going to go down to this sand, and here we'll see penguins coming up out of the ocean. These are the yellow-eyed penguins, which they have on the South Island, but they underwent some die-offs last summer, so they're somewhat endangered, but they're not as threatened as the sea lion, which is one of their main predators. So the sea lions can just eat them, and then there's some mysterious other factor causing the penguins to just die without being eaten. But you could go on these tours, which we went on, we as my husband James Gallagher and I, or we are. Anyway, and we went on this tour, and they have these things called hides that you can get in, and they're, I guess we would call them blinds here. And you can go in there and just sit in there, and the penguins come up out of the ocean and walk up they hop up the hill. And I have some other pictures of them just hopping up grassy hills. And so they're not always around icebergs. They come to more temperate regions. And who do you think has made these tracks? Or what? It's not a person. No? No? What? No? It does. Close. Closest guess yet. Sea lion. That's it. So sea lions will come in from the water and hunt for penguins, which have nests back in the grasses. So here is an example of the southern sea lion, and this is what will make the tracks. And these have recently come back. There was a lot of hunting of whales and sea lions and such in New Zealand, and conservation efforts have brought them so that they have been coming back. So you can see this could leave a track like that. And they can go pretty fast. I didn't want to get very close. This is telephoto photography. They have big fangs. Okay, and this is the most Shire-like of the pictures that I found while looking for what to show you. Many sheep. This is at the Matuki River Valley in the South Island, the Southern Alps, Treble Cone ski area, sheep, those grayish dots, an avalanche chute, many features that are typical of New Zealand, South Island, but inland a little. A lot of grazing goes on there. Okay, so next we're going on the Milford Track. And one thing that's different about there, it's in Fiordland National Park, and it's a 4-day hiking trip that you can go on. But instead of bringing your tent and all the stuff, you know, your ground cloth and your stoves and so on, they have this hut system, which means that there's a very small footprint on the ground, i.e. human footprint of ground being stirred up and trampled and so on. And then you sleep in these bunkhouses. And they have mattresses. You know, it's not a place for a great night's sleep, but it'll do. And then they have kitchens, and whoever signs up to go on the track on those days, you just kind of hang out with as you go along. And there are people from all over the world. And it was really fun, the hiking and the camaraderie. So this is the first night's hut. This is the Clinton hut. And then each hut has a ranger. The ranger here is the guy in the green shorts. These are other hikers. And he gave us a little talk on biota, geology, and so on of the area. We're actually standing on a helicopter landing pad, so supplies are flown in and removed by helicopter. And plus, if there's an emergency, people can be evacuated. One emergency they have is heavy rainfall and flooding. This area gets 9 meters of precipitation a year, which is quite a lot more than we get here. And then there are all sorts of swinging bridges to cross. This one I really liked. You walked up these steps, and then there's in this tree, you walk across the swinging bridge, and there's all sorts of epiphytes, which are plants that grow on plants on these branches. Ferns abound everywhere. So, swinging bridge, and then you have a lot of rising mists and silhouettes of trees and so on, and you can see why The Hobbit might have been filmed here. And then this is up at the top of the pass. This is Mckinnon Pass, and there's a cairn for the people who built it. These are other hikers. It's not technically dangerous The only time I ran into trouble was I was walking along looking at the ground at plants, and I tripped over rocks, an occupational hazard of botany. Anyway, and here's the folk in our group at Mckinnon Pass. That's looking towards the ocean. And another view, rising mist, little tarns up at the top, tussocks. And here's Raulia, one of the vegetable sheep. There are many species in this genus, but this is a meter or so. They live to be very old, grow slowly, but they're immense. Oh, and here's a weka. For those of you who are interested in animals, well, I had sea lions and penguins too. Here's a weka. It's a flightless rail, and it was taking a bath in this puddle right here. So we stopped and looked. And after that, we were calling the Milford Tract the Way of the Weka. Anyway, then along came this couple from China and stopped and were looking at the Weka, which is right there. A group of hikers from China had a wedding. Well, two people in the group were wed while hiking the Milford Tract, and the bride carried her wedding dress in her backpack, and it's very nice. And then here's where they, right before getting to here, they said, don't stop when walking along the trail that goes right here, avalanche prone area. It's like, okay, I'll take your word for it. So I kept going. Pretty soon, look, a little mile or so farther, this is what had fallen down. These cliffs are a few thousand feet high, and all of this had fallen down. So they get so much rain there, and one tree will lose its footing and fall down, and that leads to a domino effect, and it takes the other trees and some rocks and so on with it, and then they grow back. But avalanche chutes are pretty common sights there. This is an especially big landslide. And water is everywhere. The last day of the Milford Tract, we had to walk 12 miles to get on a boat, or else we'd be left at Sandfly Point overnight. And so guess what? We got that far quickly. Another waterfall. And this is called Lion Mountain. This is in Milford Sound. This is where you come out at the end of the hike. Looks a little bit like a sea lion. And then this is St. Clair Beach. We rented a house near here, and it was very, very nice. You could walk down to the beach, and there's an actual wave right there, and there's another one, and those kind of beach things. This is a famous surfing beach. That's White Island, about 1,500 meters away. And sharks come to this beach. So although there are a lot of swimmers here, there's also a shark warning bell. The top of this pole has a bell that you can actually ring, and shark. And one came there while we were there, one that I know of. There may have been others. And that's the hillside looking out to the Pacific. And the Otago Peninsula, harness racing track right here. Swimming beach right there. Pretty cold water. Okay, next, Scotland, very quickly. This was in July, and a group of us have a study called RAPT, Researching Alpine Functional Traits, and it's taking place in the Scottish GLORIA site at Cairngorms National Park. What it is the idea of field testing these plant functional traits on plants that are in situ, and we know what biotic and abiotic forcing agents they're exposed to. So we met up in Scotland and studied these plants. Here's a lake in the Cairngorms, and RAPT is designed because there's not only one functional trait that allows plants to live where they do. So our idea was to, well, let's measure a suite of traits against abiotic and biotic forcing agents, and then we'll be able to say, oh, this has some influence, that has some influence on which plants are where along an elevational and snowfield gradient. So we've done some field work for this. This was in July, as I said. We're now working through the analyses. These are the Cairngorms. Here is a cairn. Now, they believe in piling up big piles of stones on tops of mountains here. And I think one reason is, why not? Another reason is this mountain range can really dish it out weather-wise. And you're up above tree line. There just aren't trees for a long way away. There aren't really landmarks. In the picture where I was standing on top of the cliff, you know, you could easily be in the fog and bloop, off you would go. So any sort of a marker is very useful. Very windy up here, even on a calm day. So I guess you could get in the lee and use this as a little shelter too. So this is the, I thought, I went over there thinking, I'm going to the Alta Marcade catchment. I got there and Chris Andrews, one of the Wrapped members, said, oh, we're going up to the Alta Vacte. Like, oh, why aren't we going to the Alta Marcade? Well, Marcade, which is how I'd pronounce it, is Vacte in Gaelic. So that's one of my few words of Gaelic that I know. Anyway, here's our site. This is where those last few pictures were taken from. High elevation, mid, and low along this slope. And here's up near the top. These are lichens. This is cladonia. Some carex, bigelowii. And there we are. A quadrat, I feel better. 1 meter squared quadrat with frequency counts. Chris, Jen, Alba, I'm the photographer here. So we have our data sheets. This is a Rhacometrium heath. It's just wind-clipped moss up at the top. Mid-level, more vaccinium, a lot of ericaceous shrubs which live well on acidic soil. We looked at plants in and out of snowfields. This is lower elevation. This is Calluna Vulgaris, or the heath or heather. It's very springy to walk on, uneven ground, and kind of tricky. But all along this catchment, there are seeps, little springs coming out, and this is where you find sphagnum. And so it's good to have waterproof shoes and balance and all that stuff there.
How much of the year is this snow covered?
It is snow covered for approximately 5/6 of the year, I'd say.
And what's the elevation?
It is 1,100 meters.
So it's low compared to the other two places?
Yes, it is, but it's much farther north. It's approximately 58 north. Way farther north than us. Oh, and that brings up a point I wanted to make. Here, there we were on the hillside, it's 5 p.m. Around here, if I'm out at 5, I think, oh, I better get in before a thunderstorm gets me or a bear or something. But there, it's going to stay light until 10 or 11, and there aren't any fierce animals, so you can just stay out there and work. So we did. It was very nice. And a preliminary graph shows that we saw different plants in and out of the snowfields. And Nardus stricta is a grass that's more common in the snowfields. This isn't really labeled that well, but this is where you have more snowfield grasses and a few other plants. So we did get a difference in distribution. So that's part of our answer. And then this is the town where we stayed. This is Canusie, Scotland. Alba, Chris, there's James Gallagher, my spouse. And this is a very, very nice little village. And then the bank has those fabulous roses growing on it. The train station. These are more tourist photos from here. Some really old structures. These are standing stones on the Isle of Lewis. The Callanish standing stones. And here's a slightly newer structure. This is Castle Uillin. There's the Scottish flag there. This is on the western coast of Scotland. And then this is near the town of Elgin, Scotland. And it's good to throw in a few castle pictures when talking about Scotland, I guess. So here they are. This is the town of Stornoway on the island of Lewis. very northern town, lots of fishing and so on. And here is the island of Harris, really nice beach, and we walked out on this trail, and then there's an old monastery way out here, and that's what we walked to. But meanwhile, these Arctic terns, possibly the same ones we saw in New Zealand, were, well, I looked up and I saw them, and, oh, they look like fairies, how beautiful. And then I saw there was a conglomeration of them, and then they dive bombed us. So, and they kind of got James. Anyway, so that was a kind of a frightening thing, because they have really sharp beaks and they can just like that. So Arctic terns, and these are world travelers. I'm serious when I say this might be the same bird we saw in New Zealand. They will travel from New Zealand to the Outer Hebrides of Scotland. They're famous for it. They're not very big birds. And then these are some wildflowers on the island of Harris, growing right near the ocean, right near the Arctic tern beach. Here's one of the main roads on the island of Harris. This is two-way, a little sketchy in my opinion. And then acknowledgements. Thank Alice Martin and DJ, and who's right here. I showed your picture, but it was before you got here. Charlie Apple, my son, who also helped out in the field. The Jens, who are plant taxonomists at Glacier. Dawn Lafleur, Alta Vacte, GLORIA, NPS, RMCSU, EU Interact Transect, and Montana Tech. Of course, Montana Tech for granting me the sabbatical. Okay, thanks everybody. And I kind of motor mouthed it, but I wanted to show you a lot of different pictures. So, questions and stuff?
So, I'll ask a question. So, in Glacier National Park, there are still permanent snowfields left.
Yes.
It looked like none of the other places you were at those, or did they, but your pictures just didn't show them. And my question is, when a permanent snowfield is getting smaller and smaller, the ground around it is getting bigger and bigger.
Yes.
But some of it hasn't seen air, except briefly, for a long, long, long time.
Mm-hmm.
How long does it take for some plants to encroach in this barren area that has been covered by snow for decades, centuries, millennia? I mean, I don't know how long, but that's what's happening in Glacier National Park.
Yeah, well, it depends partly on the seed bed. A lot of these alpine plants have seeds that can last for a long time, at least decades.